Welcome, everybody. My name is David Hart. I'm the director of the Mitchell Center. One of the person who you're going to hear from today is Sam Roy. He is a postdoctoral researcher on the project, which kind of means you have to go through a lot of steps. You've got to get an undergraduate degree, then get a PhD, then you wait your turn, see if you can get a postdoc, and then who knows what happens next. I will say that Sam's was trained as and became a brilliant earth scientist, not just as a modeler, but also as a field scientist. And but he then was prepared to take some pretty big risks and shift gears and try to work in this space that we do here, which often involves a lot of thinking about what stakeholders need, dam operators or conservation groups, what are they trying to get out of this? He's got to work with a really diverse team of faculty and students just across the board. There's something like 20 plus faculty, and I've lost track of the number of students, but it's got to be over 30. A bunch of us actually, 3 different people were on the search committee that had really outstanding candidates from all over applying, and the 3 people on the search committee were very different themselves in terms of their outlook. I think the only thing we agreed on was there was no question but what Sam was the most talented candidate in a very strong pool. So, and I can assure you that that was one of the best decisions I've ever been part of in terms of recruiting him to work on this, and you're going to see why in a second. Just one last point before I turn it over to Sam is that another good indication of the way we're kind of this great gathering place of different ways of thinking, but often with shared goals about using knowledge to solve real-world problems, is that not everybody, we live in a large rural state, not everybody can be in the same room together. There are over 11 people from different institutions participating virtually today, and I'll just give you a rough idea. I won't say who they are so much because I'd run out of time. We have National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, not just from Rhode Island, Massachusetts, I think here in Maine. We have the Nature Conservancy, we have the Department of Marine Resources and the Department of Environmental Protection from Maine. We have somebody from one of the SUNY campuses in New York and somebody from Maryland DNR, all up in the ether, if you will, listening in. And so welcome to all of those folks, as well as the folks in the room, and I'll turn it over to Sam. Please join me in welcoming him.
Okay. Thanks, David, for the very kind words. Okay, so my talk today is titled Damming Decisions, Searching for Sustainable Solutions in New England Rivers. I wish I could take credit for the play on words. That was Ruth's idea entirely. Thanks, Ruth. So I'm going to give my perspective on this large project that David hinted at, where we're interested in dams, their impacts on society and the environment, both positive and negative, and the decision-making process used to determine what to do with your dam depending on their impact. So this is one just visual example of a dam decision. This is the VZ Dam, which was removed in 2013 on the Penobscot River, just south of us. Okay, so why are we interested in dams? I'll start off with just a positive. I'll start with the good stuff. So we receive many benefits from rivers and lakes. I'm going to refer to these as ecosystem services. That's a term from economics. I'm not an economist, but I use their terms sometimes in their models. And hopefully I use them correctly. But rivers and lakes provide many positive benefits for us. For example, fisheries, recreational angling, recreational whitewater, kayaking and canoeing, and they also provide habitat for threatened and endangered species as well that rely on an interconnected network to get through the different life stages. But we can also harness the power of rivers using dams to extract a few more other ecosystem services. For example, we can build reservoirs to provide a reliable source of drinking water for our towns and cities. We can also harness the power of flowing water to generate hydroelectric power. The issue with those added benefits of dams is that they tend to negatively impact the other ecosystem services that are at play. So we can kind of divide ecosystem services into two different parties. One, which is improved by dam removal. So that would be, for example, sea-run fisheries and habitat. Those would be fish that spend at least one part of their life cycle out to sea, and they return to rivers to spawn. I'm not a fish biologist either, so I hope I'm speaking appropriately here. And other ecosystem services which are diminished by dam removal, such as hydropower and municipal reservoirs. And as always with these sort of wicked problems, there's many different ecosystem services that could be positively or negatively impacted by different dam decisions, depending on your perspective and the local context to them. And to make things more difficult as well, and rightfully so, is that there are many different stakeholders out there who interpret and value these benefits much differently. So they interface with these ecosystem services in much different ways, and they all should be considered in the decision-making process. So today's objectives, I'll be first talking a little bit about the need for collaboration, and I'll be kind of going into this a little bit when I describe the Future of Dams project in a bit more detail. And second, I'll focus on my own personal research within that research project, getting the most out of dam decisions, exploring scenarios that can improve these ecosystem services. So the future of dams, David already gave a pretty good description of the project, but it's about 40 or so researchers that represents dozens of different research disciplines, research topics, expertise. We're really interested in building interdisciplinary collaboration. And what that means is we're not just interested in kind of providing our own research on the science of dams. We're interested in building something collectively, something new that's actually could be potentially useful in the decision-making process. So we find many different avenues to work collaboratively. We could be, building a model together or playing with a model that was designed by the Rhode Island School of Design. We meet in groups, large groups, small groups. We go for a pint down at the pub at the Old Port. And we write a lot of words on big pieces of paper, which seems to help quite a bit. And we also meet pretty frequently with stakeholders because they provide their own form of experience in this problem. And this guy, by the way, his name is Tony Grassi. He's going to give a talk on October 23rd, and it's going to be on his experience in applied sustainability science, which should be really interesting. I think he's going to talk about his dam, I'm guessing. So through all these conversations, we come up with a common set of terms. You find out pretty quickly that you need to sort of translate your own expertise in order to really get something. So this is actual real data that we've collected on the folks in the Future of Dams project. These are terms that are frequently used, and the size of the fonts is proportional to the frequency in which those terms are used. I think the colloquial term for this is a word cloud. It looks more like a word brick, which I think kind of works for dams because it kind of looks like a dam. But it doesn't quite give you the context of what's actually going on in our project. So in order to do that, we need to understand how things are connected across these research topics. And this diagram is something I just sort of conjured up based on a similar set of data that we've collected through interviews of different members of the Future of Dams project. And you don't have to get too bogged down in the details here. All I want you to understand is that there's different circles here, and these are representing different research topics of interest in the project. We have different connections between them. The size of the bubble represents the number of people who are involved in that research, and the networks are used to sort of symbolize the connectivity between other research topics. So it kind of looks a bit like, something that you might sweep from underneath your sofa, kind of like a dust bunny type thing. But it's actually, I think, pretty informative, visually speaking. It just helps you to understand and map out how collaboration is proceeding in the project. And this is dynamic. It changes over time. And today I'm just going to be focusing on one component of this project, production possibility frontiers. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you why production possibility frontiers. Production possibility frontiers is one way to understand how ecosystem services are or could be impacted by dam decisions. It's pretty useful in that it's able to draw upon and inform other sources of knowledge. So you see that it has many different connections to these other research topics. So the work that I do in production possibility frontiers is only possible because of the research that others have done in other research topics. So it's highly collaborative. And one of the other major reasons why I'm pursuing this technique is because it really takes advantage of big data and machine learning. These are two very big buzzwords these days, but it's really true. We're working with gigabytes upon gigabytes of data here, and we're dealing with many, many, many different scenarios. And by many, many, I mean trillions and trillions of different dam decision scenarios that are occurring in New England. So it is really important to sort of kick it up into the 21st century and to use these approaches. And this is just one example of the reason why that's important. This is a map of New England and the major watersheds of New England. We have at least over 14,000 dams in New England. We don't really know for sure. It's actually kind of hard to count dams. It's reflective of the amount of dams that were developed through colonial era and through the Industrial Revolution that may still exist. They may still serve a purpose, or they may not. They may be abandoned, or they may serve a new purpose as sort of a cultural or iconic representation of communities. So I'll give an example of how production possibility frontiers works in exploring the effects of dam removal on hydropower and sea run fish habitat. I could use any number of those ecosystem services that I hinted at previously. These two just seem to be the easiest to explain. So we're interested in what's happening in a watershed. So this is our watershed model. So we see the rain falling, and all the rain that's deposited in this watershed collects in tributaries and collects in rivers, and it all drains down to this outlet point here. And say we took advantage of the flowing water to generate hydroelectric power. So we build 6 dams on this river, represented by the yellow dots. So we've taken full advantage of the hydropower capacity potential in the river, but we've we're sort of missing out on the fish habitat now because we've blocked the river. So if we were to plot this in a 2-dimensional space, we could say that we have a relatively large amount of hydropower capacity, but we have a fairly low amount of fish habitat available. So then we can start to explore different scenarios of dam removal to see how we can potentially improve fish habitat while minimizing our impact on hydropower, because it's still something of value to us. So say, for example, we take out the first dam on our river. We would have a subsequent decrease in hydropower capacity and an increase in fish habitat. Again, if you were to remove a few more dams on the river, you'd have a drop in hydropower capacity and an increase in habitat. And that would continue until you eventually remove all the dams and you've achieved the full potential of fish habitat in your river, and you have 0 hydropower being produced. So these are just a sampling of different scenarios that we could pursue in our watershed. There are other decisions that don't quite make as much sense. For example, if we removed all of the dams, except for the one right at the mouth of the river, we would remove all of our hydropower capacity, more or less, but we wouldn't have any advancement in fish habitat because we're still blocking all of the river. So there are a number of scenarios. There's 6 dams, so there's actually 94 different combinations of dam removal scenarios out there. I'm not going to go through all of them, lucky you. But we can split them up between Scenarios that are considered to be efficient, that is, those are scenarios that provide the greatest cumulative output from the two different ecosystem services. And inefficient scenarios which don't quite provide that same amount of combined output between those two valued ecosystem services. And the production possibility frontier is just a curve that we draw through those efficient scenarios. They're a collection of decision scenarios that provide the greatest combined output of both ecosystem services. If we're interested in comparing between decision scenarios, we can use the opportunity cost to figure out how much hydropower capacity we need to give up to gain fish habitat. And in many cases, these frontiers are very nonlinear, as this one is. So the opportunity cost will change depending on which two scenarios you're comparing. And I don't want to get too optimistic about this, but it seems that the production possibility frontier might be a useful way of refining the decision space. So you may be able to actually reduce the number of decisions that are actually physically possible in your watershed. That's one thing that production possibility frontiers do well, is they provide you with an understanding of the physical limits of a watershed in producing those ecosystem services that you desire. And if we have, for example, two groups of stakeholders, one who is interested in conserving hydropower capacity and one who is interested in restoring fish habitat, there may be some scenario or some combination of scenarios that fall within their range of acceptability. Okay, so that was a cartoon watershed. Let's actually use a real watershed. The Penobscot River, sort of the obvious choice because we're in Penobscot County. And let's zoom in. Most of you are here, besides those of you who are video conferencing in. And in the Penobscot River, we're going to go through a frontier that is based off of hydropower and habitat, but we're going to be specific about the habitat. So this is for river herring. And again, I'm not a fish biologist or a fisheries expert, but I've been told that the species alewives and blueback herring are often combined when you're considering their extent of habitat. It's not that they prefer the same type of habitat, but they're not quite as picky as other species. So to make things a little bit simpler, I've just combined them into river herring. So the Penobscot River generates approximately 20% of the hydropower capacity in Maine, and it offers about 50% of the current total habitat in Maine. And I should explain this map. So this is the Penobscot River. So there are some dots on here that represent dams, and the color represents, green represents hydropower dams, and purple represents dams that do not generate hydropower. The blue lines and lakes represent the historic habitat extent of river herring, and the yellow highlighted regions represent the present habitat extent. Lakes that are in sort of this green color are historically inaccessible to the fish. So this is the production possibility frontier for hydropower capacity and river herring functional habitat. And by functional habitat, I'll just add this quickly, that means that I'm not just measuring the area available to the fish, it's actually scaled based on the quality of the habitat, so based on the preferences for the fish. So let's begin to sort of march down this curve, shall we? So let's start off at the upper left. That's our current situation. And on the map, I've represented regions that are either inaccessible to river herring or difficult to access with a shaded in gray area. So for example, there may be some dams, and there are some dams on this river that provide fish passage, but it's not perfect. It's not 100% passage of fish. So there's a probability that some fish will survive moving up and downstream beyond that dam. But it's not the entire population. So if we begin to march down this curve, so let's move to the next point. If we were to move to this decision scenario, we would have removed some dams on the lower main stem of the Penobscot, some of the tributaries, and we would have improved habitat. We would have increased our habitat by about 8% of its historic region. So if we move on, in this scenario, the Milford Dam has been removed. So that's the dam that's actually closest to us on the Penobscot River. And this has opened up the majority of the river in the sort of the central main stem of the Penobscot River, part of the Piscataquis River, and the Pleasant River. And we've increased habitat by about 37% while reducing power by 5%. If we were to remove the West Enfield Dam, we would, as well as the Milford Dam, we'd increase habitat by about 75% of its historical range, and we would reduce power by about 13%. So we can continue to move on. This point here would enhance habitat by 89%. Power would be reduced by 21%. 94% to 32%, which would open up the east branch of the Penobscot River. And at this point, we still have dams obstructing the west branch of the Penobscot River and a number of other dams that tend to be lake dams or dams that do not have a very large drainage area, don't have a very large footprint on habitat. And we're at about 52% loss of hydropower capacity original. So at this stage, you don't need to go much further with the west branch because you've already provided 100% of the historic habitat for the river herring. And that's based off of a model for river herrings. Just keep that in mind, please. And our numbers on the quality of habitat consistently change as they're updated and improved. So there are other decision scenarios that you could pursue. For example, there might be a breached dam on your river. You may lose a dam through breaching. Or there may be decisions motivated by federal relicensing. So the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee is in charge of relicensing dams, and if they deem a dam to be too high of an impact on the ecology of the river, they may request it to be removed. But it may not actually sync with sort of the strategic approach of this frontier. So you may have a reduction in hydropower capacity, but you may not have a good increase in river herring functional habitat. It really depends spatially on where those decisions are being made. So to summarize, large gains in habitat are possible with a limited loss of hydropower capacity, and that's largely due to this nonlinear pattern in the curve. And this reflects the majority of these dams in the lower main stem of the Penobscot River. They tend to be run-of-river dams, and those tend to generate less hydropower than the larger dams in the West Branch, for example. And also, as you approach the headwaters of the river, you have less and less habitat to provide by removing dams. So there are other things that we really need to consider here. We're only talking about 2 ecosystem services. There are many more that we need to consider. There's other decisions besides removal. It's not really fair to just consider dam removal. There are other things that can be done. There's management practices. There's infrastructure development that could enhance our ecosystem services. And of course, there's other rivers besides the Penobscot that we're studying that we need to do a cross comparison between watersheds to really understand the story of a individual watershed. And of course, the most difficult question is, what do different stakeholders think about these changes? And I can't say much on that topic, but I find it very interesting and very important. So let's just quickly look at other ecosystem services and how they might be affected by our dam decision-making process. And let's take a look at Atlantic salmon. It's a very important species for the Penobscot River. It has a much different preference for habitat than river herring. It tends to migrate to the headwaters of rivers. They like water that's cooler and faster flowing. And they're also an endangered species the Gulf of Maine. The Gulf of Maine distinct population of Atlantic salmon is an endangered species. Is that right, Joe? Thank you. So it's a critical species to consider for this type of assessment. So let's go back to our scenario where we were at, where we predict a 100% increase in habitat for river herring. If we were to do the same scenario and look at the benefits for Atlantic salmon, we would only be at about 82% of their historic habitat. And the reason is the orange lines represent the historic habitat extent of salmon, and they go well into the west branch of the Penobscot River. So if you're interested in just improving, the population size of river herring, maybe this is a good thing to do. But if you're more interested in Atlantic salmon, you need a completely different campaign of dam decisions to parse through to get to your objectives. And there's also, if you're interested in more than just 2 ecosystem services, you need scenarios that provide more, that prioritize more than 2 ecosystem services. So we're talking about multi-objective approaches, which that's where big data and machine learning really come into play. Okay, so decision alternatives, that's another component that I thought was rather important to consider. Of course, we have dam removal, but we also have, you could change your management practices to allow for more efficient hydropower generation or fish passage probability. You could have infrastructural development to improve fish passage upstream and downstream of dams. Or you could improve hydropower capacity to make sure that your dams are generating at their greatest efficiency. So another graph, I apologize, I have just a couple more to go. But this red line, that was the frontier that we showed previously for the Penobscot River. And those were scenarios, either you remove a dam or you keep it as is. That's pretty much the limited scope. If we were to consider improvements to dams, so improvements to fish passage and to hydropower generation, you can actually be in a scenario where you can improve both hydropower capacity and river herring functional habitat, which is important because we often think of these as conflicting ecosystem services. They rely on dams in a different way. One relies on the removal of dams, the other relies on a dam being there to harness the power of the river. So if you take a sort of a spatial approach and you can maybe develop hydropower in one section of a river and restore another section because it has valuable habitat, that could lead to a net positive for both ecosystem services. So more decision alternatives lead to more opportunities to increase your ecosystem services. And the Penobscot River Restoration Trust is a good example of this, where a lot of the headlines were for the removal of 2 dams, but there was actually a lot more behind it. There was hydropower capacity improvements on rivers on the Stillwater River, and a natural fishway developed on the Piscataquis River. So it was a multifaceted approach. So let's do a quick comparison in 2 watersheds. So again, we have the Penobscot here with the red star, and let's compare it to the Connecticut River. The reason why I'm doing this is that spatially they're pretty far apart, but they're also quite different. The Penobscot River is, topographically speaking, is relatively low relief compared to the Connecticut River. And the number of dams. So Connecticut has about an order of magnitude greater amount of dams than the Penobscot, at least. There's a lot of dams on the Connecticut. So if we were to compare the 2, again, comparing our 2 ecosystem services, hydropower capacity and river herring habitat, you can see that the Connecticut River generates about 3.6 times more hydropower than the Penobscot River, and it offers 5.6 times less river herring habitat. So if your interest was in restoring river herring as a fishery, the Penobscot would likely be a better target for that reason. The Connecticut River is highly developed. It's almost as if it's sort of optimized to generate power. That's not necessarily the case for other ecosystem services, of course. If we were looking at American shad or Atlantic salmon, if Atlantic salmon were in the Connecticut River, they would probably prefer this type of habitat, which has fast-flowing water and relatively cool water. So, but what's interesting from this is that the potential ecosystem services that you're trying to balance out here can vary significantly spatially, depending on what watershed you're looking at, but also on the amount of development. So there's a lot of hydropower dams on the Connecticut. Cross-watershed decisions may help preserve or increase ecosystem services. So maybe you could further develop hydropower capacity in the Connecticut River while restoring fisheries in the Penobscot, but of course there's a limit to that. Stakeholders in the Connecticut River may not like that idea of taking the brunt of needing more or providing more hydropower capacity for New England and not receiving the benefits of directly receiving the benefits of the fishery. So finally, just going on to my limited understanding of stakeholder perceptions of dam decisions. All I know is that there's many different stakeholders involved, many different perspectives. They have different interests and they have different objectives from dam decisions. So the way that I'm trying to interface with this part of the project, and I've been working a lot with Tyler Quiring and Bridie McGreevy, among many others who are experts in this field. My interest is in searching for the local or regional patterns and stakeholder perceptions to help fine-tune the decision-making process. So if you understand the cares and concerns of stakeholders in different watersheds or in different sub-watersheds, you can fine-tune, custom tailor your decision support tool to better assist them with their needs. So that's fairly fascinating to me. And this map here is just kind of gives you an idea of what we're sniffing at. This is what we call a heat map. Relative intensity of media coverage. So we have information on media that is related to dams or dam removal in New England. And we've geo-referenced those news articles to different dams. If they're referenced in the article, we link them spatially to the dam. And the hottest zones are on the Penobscot. So this is the Stillwater Dam and the VZ Dam. That's the Howland Dam. This is the Edwards Dam, the Kennebec. So that was a sort of a milestone dam removal. That was, I believe, the first time the Federal Energy Regulatory Committee denied relicensing because of ecological reasons. And of course, there's others on the Penobscot and the Merrimack River as well. So just some conclusions. I don't know if I can conclude anything, but I can share with you what I've learned so far in this process. It takes a village, so it takes a lot of know-how. It takes a lot of conversations between very smart people, much smarter than myself. And it takes a lot of interaction with stakeholders to truly understand what's at the root of the problem involving dam decisions. And decision support, I think Production Possibility Frontiers is very useful there because it's able to synthesize and critically assess the impacts of dam decisions and their potential alternatives. You're able to refine the decision space so you can narrow down the number of decisions that may actually make sense from those that may not. And you can also use it to draw upon and inform other knowledge sources. So it really, again, it really relies on the knowledge of other people to make it possible. And it's adaptive, able to handle big data. So with that, I'll just thank you and ask for any questions. I have a very long list of special thanks here. And this is my daughter enjoying some ecosystem services of her own in all seasons. So thanks. Nick.
So it takes a village, it takes big data. Given other villages and other big data out there, how scalable is this approach to, say, other places, say, out west, where they're dealing with a lot of other sensitive issues related to dam removal?
I think it's very possible. It's a highly generalized technique. So it depends on the ecosystem services that you're interested in. It depends on the biological processes that create those ecosystem services, and how they're perceived by the stakeholders. But as long as you have useful data that can actually represent the value of those ecosystem services and how they may change based on your decision-making process, then it could be used for that purpose as well. We've had to sort of finagle the technique into dams because it's been used for other purposes, typically like land use purposes. But it really comes from, the production possibility frontiers comes from economics. I'm totally not an economist, so I hope I don't sound like an idiot. But it's kind of recently been used in ecology to understand things that it's difficult to get an economic value for. Joe?
One of the challenges that I think you touched on was the comparison between the Connecticut River and the Postdoctoral River, and that is the inherent sort of value judgment that one can impose on a decision by structuring the axes the same size. And so, I look at decisions where, well, how much do we put in a science class? How much time do we give to creation science versus evolution? And, well, let's compromise and put equal. And so, the same sort of thing might apply to a situation where you're trying to optimize and you put the two axes as a priori stacked as the same size. And I was wondering if you had any wisdom starting to play with this in an ecological setting of how one might be better informed so that your beginning structure doesn't push any kind of decision making straight to what seems like the most obvious compromise along that production possibility frontier.
That's a great question. A couple of things. So yeah, you're right. So the production possibility frontiers, the way that I'm structuring it with those ecosystem services, they don't have a common currency. So it is that you can have some pretty broad speculation involved in deciphering what that curve actually means and how it's scaled and moved. But I'm hoping to get a better sense of if its use within a decision support tool, working with Emma Fox and Sharon Klein, actually, on their understanding of stakeholder perceptions, stakeholder objectives, and how best to weigh the different ecosystem services that are at play. So that, I think, that's one avenue towards sort of restructuring the frontier to better represent what people are interested in. So by asking people how they value these ecosystem services, you can weigh them. And then that's another method of getting at or narrowing down the number of dam decision scenarios that could be best suited for that situation. I don't know if that answers the question. Yes?
I've been thinking a lot about decisions that are made on the river, and in Maine it seems to me that it's like the dominant culture, the white culture, is coming really in conflict with the Native American culture, and that a lot of the decisions that are being made are ones that significantly harm the traditional way of life of this other culture. So how do you make sure that you don't have the majority decisions really harming the minority, just puts the minority needs?
So that's an excellent question, and I'm definitely not the person to answer that question. But I do understand that it's very important to be able to get a proper representation of the stakeholders at the same table to really get a sense of where that conversation should be going. But I can't say any more than that.
Could I just say one thing? I agree that it's a really important issue, and Sam mentioned this thing called the Penobscot River Restoration Trust, which was a large group of government, tribe, non-governmental organizations thinking about what could happen here. And I think some of the most important ideas for that work came from the Penobscot Nation, and they played a central role in all of that. I think if John Banks were here from the Department of Natural Resources, he might say that, I'm just guessing, might say that that was actually one where they felt like it worked kind of the way they hoped some of the time. And I think there are many other decisions about this river and many other rivers where they'd say, not at all. So it would be interesting to ask, what was it that perhaps made the decisions about those dams and those kinds of trade-offs that Sam has described? Did those work better than average? And if so, why? And could we learn how to build on that? I think that's a really good point.
Yes, yeah, we're not.
If I could just piggyback on that too. Those are questions we are asking of tribal members who are involved in the Penobscot River Restoration Trust. And acquiring some PhD students leading that, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to share some of what we've learned. We're just in the early stages of asking those questions.
Nick again.
So, one of the Achilles heels of big data and machine learning is the quality of the input data set being a big limiting factor in the model that's produced. What do you see as being sort of the low hanging fruit? What are the ways in which we could improve the inherent biases in the input data, or get better scientific information? What's the low hanging fruit?
Yeah, that's. I don't know if there is any low hanging fruit, because I mean, as long as you understand what's out there and what's available to you, you should be using the most accurate data that you possibly can. But I mean, we're kind of sort of pioneering this, and we rely on so many different data sources, and we're using the best possible data that we can. But because I'm not a fish biologist, I'm not an economist, I don't know. I don't really understand those other realms that the ecosystem services are related to. So I personally can't do that, but I can have important conversations with people who know more than me about the reliability of these sources. So that I guess maybe that's the low hanging fruit, is having conversations with people who know a lot more than you, and sharing data and receiving data from them, but also providing results for them, because maybe they're interested in different decision scenarios for their own purposes. Yes?
No, so my question is, have you looked into obtaining the ecosystem services provided by the hydropower through other means of like renewable energy, or is this more about like the organizations that operate the hydropower and how it would affect them?
Do you mean like other energy sources?
Like other forms of renewable energy, like wind power or something like that, or is this more about like the organizations who own the hydropower and how the dam removal would affect them, or is this more about like the ecosystem services in general?
Well, I'm not in that realm yet. I'm very interested in it, and there may be other folks in the Future of Dams project who are actively studying that sort of the transfer of energy to another source. But I'm not quite there yet. So for at this time, it's dam centric. So it's more involved in the dam operators and the impact on the dam operators,
Okay.
and the people who rely on that reliable energy source. Right.
So we talk a lot about how, in the work that we do at Mitchell Center and the sustainability science approach, that it needs to be iterative. So we start with, questions that stakeholders have posed and come to an enriched sense of the problems, and we go back and do research and bring back to stakeholders. I'm just wondering if you could comment on what you see as the next iteration of this work.
The next all team meeting. I don't know. It's kind of difficult because it's not just like it's not everybody jumps forward once. It's people are making headway at different times depending on what they're working on, and depending on who they're working on. So, for me personally, I think that the next jump is to, it's just small things like, improving our understanding of different ecosystem services to sort of broaden our perspective. But I mean, there's other frontiers as well. There's understanding of how stakeholders perceive dam decisions. There's which stakeholders are interested in these different ecosystem services and why. So there's a lot of different jumps in different directions. Yeah, Laura.
So thank you. This is really fascinating. So you mentioned a couple times decision support tool, and that I guess I'm curious when you say that. I guess a couple things. First, who is making the decisions that you guys are interested in, or are there multiple groups that will use aspects of this to make decisions? And then I guess related, when you show something like the curve, with the different ecosystem services, like, would that same information ultimately be packaged in different ways for different audiences, or is that, as Brady says, multiple iterations down the line? So just more about the decision tool itself.
Yeah, so I guess that kind of ties into Joe's comments about how do you actually structure this? How is it packaged? And do you package it differently for different people? I kind of see it as it could potentially be a decision support tool for the FERC relicensing process for sort of like a high scale. But I'm hoping that it could also be useful for communities who have inherited a mill dam, for example, and it's in ill repair and something needs to happen. It either needs to be repaired or removed. And if we could use this technique to help them understand the connections between their decision and the things that they love about the river and their dam and their community, then that's really how I hope to help. But you're right, the way that you package that is really important. And if it's used as a tool against someone else, we definitely don't want that. So that we need to have some careful consideration for how it's actually going to be used. I didn't actually answer your question. I'm sorry.
So Sam, there's probably people in the audience at very different stages in getting degrees and later on in their careers. And you started out your career with a pretty sharp focus on earth science, both modeling and field work. And now you're not that many years later, in a very different place where there must be trade-offs on a production possibility frontier for you in terms of how sharply focused you are on the things you know best. You've said, and I think it's generous of you to say that you're not an expert in all this stuff. That's what it means to do that kind of work. So that's kind of a difference between where you know a lot about a smaller number of things, and then kind of allowing that stakeholders should shape the work. So who makes decisions, and what would a tool look like, and how would we make it work for them? What are the trade-offs for you in working in those different modes, like you did, say, when you were doing your PhD versus on this project?
So the trade-offs of sustainability science versus very academic work.
Yeah.
I can speak to the reward that I feel in working in sustainability science. I think that's the biggest trade-off towards sustainability science. It's coming from a background where you can produce a lot of research, and it's research that you may enjoy, but it may not impact that many people. So you may not actually be doing work that is benefiting society. You may be, enhancing our understanding of a natural phenomenon, but it may not be directly relevant to people's everyday lives. And for some reason or another, that just it bugged me a little bit. So that's why I was delighted to enter into sustainability science. And I found that the techniques that I was using in my PhD, they're transferable to sustainability science. So it's always possible to kind of move between. It's always possible to work in an academic realm, but also jump into sustainability science, as long as you're working with a community where people are interested in collaborating and they're friendly and they have time to spare to converse and produce something new with you. So luckily I just kind of stumbled into that opportunity, so it's been very beneficial for me.
Any other questions? Well, let's thank Sam again for great job.